Well, hello everyone. Wasn't sure if I was going to make a video today, but I have been persuaded to because the topic is very much of interest, and it actually came up during my talk, my interview with Professor Roer yesterday, and that is the issue of whether the secret services, the intelligence services of Britain and America deliberately tried to destroy the reputation of Arnold Toynbee, the world-famous historian of cyclical history. Now, in my book, The Prophets of Doom, buy it now. I actually don't have a copy of it here, ironically. I should get one so I can hold it, but I'll put a picture of it here. I came across a number of reviews of Toynbee's book, and one of them by the historian Hugh Trevor-Roper really caught my eye. Incidentally, these red books that I have here, a number of people ask me, what are they? They're actually a 23-volume collection of Winston Churchill's History of the English-Speaking Peoples, expanded and added to by various other historians. And if you have a look, the editorial board of this project included a certain Hugh Trevor-Roper. And there is a picture of him, helpfully, here, which I will, so you can see what he looks like. Hold on a second. There is Hugh Trevor-Roper. Give me one moment. Oh, here we are. So here you can see is Hugh Trevor-Roper, who wrote one of the most ridiculous reviews of any book I've ever come across. That book, incidentally, was Arnold Toynbee's huge study of history. This is the abridged version. The actual one is in 12 volumes, and I did consult them when I wrote Prophets of Doom, the individual volumes, but my personal copies is in this abridged version, and still it's a pretty long book. Anyway, here is what I wrote in Prophets of Doom on Trevor-Roper's attack on Toynbee. Let me just read what Hugh Trevor-Roper said. And the reason this is significant is, as you can see, he was like a very important British historian, important enough to sit on the editorial board of Winston Churchill's official History of the English-Speaking Peoples. I write, this is more evident when we come to consider Hugh Trevor-Roper, whose review of, and by the way, if you're wondering why I'm wearing this hat, there has just been the most epic storm, a thunderstorm, so, it was like an earthquake. It was really exciting, and it started pouring down, so I went out there, and I thought I'd break, so the hat comes out when it's when the temperature drops. But anyway, he says, okay, this is me, writing on Trevor-Roper on Toynbee. I write, when we come to consider Hugh Trevor-Roper, whose review of Toynbee's study is frankly hysterical, both in terms of being at times laugh out loud funny, and in terms of the author's almost comically unrestrained emotion. He starts out by saying that he finds Toynbee's work to be, quote, untrue, illogical and dogmatic, and then wonders why it is so popular with the general public. Although every chapter of it has been shot to pieces by the experts, although it is written in a style with which that of Hitler or Rosenberg is of Gibbonian lucidity, it has been hailed by the unprofessional public as a masterpiece. Within a page he is rounding on Toynbee, Trevor-Roper this is, for not being a liberal, and accusing him of emotionalism. His whole analysis, says Trevor-Roper, is governed by strong emotional prejudice. In spite of his Hellenistic training, his mind is thoroughly anti-rational and illiberal. Trevor-Roper then resorts to the reductio ad Hitlerum and compares Toynbee to Hitler. As the review reaches fever pitch, Trevor-Roper cranks up the rhetoric, intended, of course, to ridicule Toynbee and for humorous effect. He says, all creation has been groaning and travailing to produce him, Toynbee. Winchester College has at last in him achieved its purpose. The ultimate bounds of human reason have, at last by him, been pierced. He continues, I do not consider it a priori inconceivable that Toynbee should regard himself as the Messiah. It is as if Hugh Trevor-Roper lost all sense of himself writing this review. 6 pages follow, in which he imagines a post-collapse society that worships Arnold Toynbee as a godlike prophet. He adds towards the end, I find it not merely erroneous, but hateful. Toynbee detests Western civilization because it is basically liberal and rational. Detesting it, he wishes to see it destroyed, and he does not care who destroys it. Now, there are uncharitable reviews, and then there are reviews that take character assassination to the level of comparing your subject unfavourably to Hitler, imagining a dystopian future which worships your subject as a god across a 6-page lampoon and calling that person's work hateful. So my point here, and this is still reading from the book, is not necessarily to defend Toynbee, but rather to point out what he offended in these historians was not in their sense of what is or is not accurate history, but rather their faith in capital P progress. It should be clear at any rate that their accusations of Toynbee being anti-rational and emotional were projection. And I have to say, if you actually read this book, Toynbee is anything but dogmatic. He's much more kind of classically English and bumbling, and he starts things off and he says, oh, but the evidence changes, and he's actually quite much less systematic and much less like that than you'd get the impression of from reading Trevor-Roper. And I'm going to show you another picture of this man before I kind of talk about what was actually going on here, because this is one of those moments where I thought, yeah, this is weird. This attack is strange, and I didn't know then what I know now. Here's Hugh Trevor-Roper again, sitting next to there's AJP Taylor. Here's Hugh Trevor-Roper. Okay, now during the Second World War, Hugh Trevor-Roper, like so many English academics and intellectuals, George Orwell among them, actually worked for the government in the intelligence services. Ostensibly he was working for MI6, but he was actually seconded to a unit in something that was called MI8. And Trevor-Roper wasn't just working for them, he was the head of the radio intelligence services during World War II. Okay? So, in other words, you could say he was one of the head spies in the British establishment. Okay? Now, subsequently, as I learned in this book, Who Paid the Piper by Francis Stoner Saunders, many of the kind of Cold War efforts around Europe and in America and in Britain actually had significant CIA money behind them. And in fact, after I did the interview with Grover Furr, Robert Conquest, because we were talking about Stalin, obviously Robert Conquest came up. Robert Conquest was also a British intellectual / journalist, writer who was involved with the intelligence services during World War II. And, I mentioned that, Conquest comes up here as, possibly being a CIA asset and so on. And Furr sent me this Guardian article all about this spook unit, basically, that was called the IRD, right, which was basically an intelligence services front which funded all sorts of figures and all sorts of people. And Robert Conquest is named in this article when this was all revealed in the late 70s, as anti kind of communist propaganda during the Cold War. And one of the people who was funded and who was part of this group, the IRD, was Hugh Trevor-Roper. Now, the IRD they jointly funded and ran a magazine with the CIA that was set up by the famous neocon Irving Kristol, and also a poet called Spender, called Encounter magazine. And you can read all about this on their Wikipedia page. And that attack that I just read you on Arnold Toynbee came in the pages of Encounter. So Hugh Trevor-Roper, working for the IRD, publishing in the CIA/IRD front, Encounter, launched this scathing attack on one of the world's most preeminent and famous historians, Arnold Toynbee. And the significance of this attack from Hugh Trevor-Roper, was extraordinary on Toynbee's reputation. Because up until that point, he'd been, he was very popular with the public. Lots of people bought his books, hundreds of thousands of copies of this book sold. And considering how dense it is, a history book, pretty, significant sales for, such an esoteric book. Toynbee was on TV, he was known, and still people know who Arnold Toynbee was, but his reputation never recovered from this scathing attack by Hugh Trevor-Roper. So I find that really interesting, that the CIA and the British government and the intelligence services were actually threatened by the thesis of a study of history, which was cyclical history that questioned the modern belief in capital P progress, the progressive linear view of history, which I discuss in Prophets of Doom. Very interesting that the governments of that time would take such an interest in it that they would go out of their way in their fronts to use somebody of the reputation of Hugh Trevor-Roper basically to try to destroy Toynbee. And I just thought it's just one of those things. And the reason I'm bringing this to your attention, because it's not simply some little thing of trivial academic interest. It is basically basically explaining and revealing just how little of the discourse during after World War II and during the Cold War was actually open. This was not an open, free exchange of ideas. Now, obviously, they didn't lock Toynbee up. They didn't stop him publishing. They didn't, what we call today deplatform him. He continued to write rebuttals of reviews of his books and things like that. But the scales were tilted. The system was like, yeah, we're gonna do Toynbee in. We don't want this cyclical history idea. The idea that things are declining in Britain, for example. The idea that after the Empire things are going down the shitter, which are obviously or even that the American Empire, may see this downward swing. They didn't want that being like the dominant narrative. They wanted the dominant narrative to be one of liberalism and progress and things like that. So they tilted the scales. They actually tilted the scales, to take somebody of the stature of Toynbee down. The reason this is relevant today should be obvious. I mean, there's this whole debate going on at the moment between Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson, where it seems like, Fuentes is getting more popular. He's challenging mainstream narratives and so on. And now there's this coordinated attack to take down, it's the same tactic, his character. It's character assassination all of the time. And it just makes you wonder how many other times this happened during the period. This is just one isolated incident. If you read this book, there's basically like no field, no discipline. This is fairly esoteric historical discussion. But it talks about art. It talks about all sorts of things in this book that were involved with these sorts of gay ops, as we call them. So I thought this would be an interesting kind of avenue for people to research, further incidents like this. This is one of those times where I raised my eyebrows at the Hugh Trevor-Roper. I never looked into it, and then I subsequently kind of pieced together things. I was like, oh, Hugh Trevor-Roper, was a spook, basically. He was working. He never stopped working for the intelligence services or taking money for them, and publishing in their fronts, like Encounter magazine. All right, pick up a course at the academic agency, Foundations of Research, if you're interested in doing research. But there's the Trivium, there's Foundations of Shakespeare, so many others, and I'll catch you next time. If you liked this video, be sure to like and subscribe. You can join the channel for thousands of hours of past shows in the archive and hundreds of videos. If you have any questions, you can leave a super chat or a super thanks, and I'll be sure to pick it up during my weekly office hours, which run every Tuesday afternoon. I also provide courses at the academic agency, which I encourage people to buy. Thousands of students now have taken the Trivium to improve their skills in writing, logic, and rhetoric. Just 3 of many courses available. Buy it now. But most importantly of all, friends, get out.